Thanks for tuning in to Men for the Win, a podcast hosted by David Kufis and Dan Thompson, two avid fans who appreciate well-played baseball, especially when it's done by the Twins. Men for the Win is sponsored by the Grand Group with Edina Realty. Are you looking to purchase a new home in the Twin Cities area? Or perhaps you're trying to sell your current home? Whether you're upsizing or downsizing, the Grand Group with Edina Realty will meet all of your housing needs. Contact the Grand Group by emailing thegran, that's G-R-A-N, group, at edinarealty.com, or call them by phone at 612-817-8751. The Grand Group with Edina Realty, 7-time Minneapolis-St. Paul Magazine Super Agent Award winners.
On this episode, David, Dan, and Hoges give their 2024 Minnesota Twins season predictions. Thanks for listening. Enjoy. Thanks for tuning in to Men for the Win. My name is David Kufis. With me, as always, is Dan Thompson and special third-chair guest in studio, Andrew Hoges Hoganson. Boys, it's almost time. We are days away. It's no longer weeks. It's no longer months. Days away from regular season Minnesota Twins baseball. Are we excited?
I'm so excited. I can't wait at all. It's just so weird, though, because we're supposed to be getting, 24 inches of snow here in the metro area this weekend. So it just feels like, baseball must be coming right after that, right?
Have you guys, have you placed your bets yet on who's going to win the opener? Or did you go through a bookie?
No, actually, my interpreter placed a couple of bets for me.
Perfect. Oh, man. What a story. What a story to rock the baseball world right away.
So I have just a couple of questions. So for those of you who don't know what we're talking about, Shohei Ohtani, who Andrew Hoges Hoganson and many would argue is the best player of this generation and the greatest baseball player on the planet. Some of us may disagree. I don't know. I'm not saying who. I may not exactly think that way. But that being said, his interpreter got in trouble for, well, first, it was very confusing, the order of events for how this came out in the news. Because at first it sounded like he stole from Ohtani, and then it came out that it was gambling debts, and then it came out that it was $4.5 million in gambling debts. So I have a couple of questions here. They are trying their best to ensure that Ohtani is not wrapped up in this, and that he was the victim in all of this. Okay, what bookie is letting an interpreter rack up a debt of $4.5 million, boys?
Yeah, there's so many parts to this story that are just incredibly fishy. I mean, when the interpreter comes out first and just says, yep, Ohtani knew about all of this, he helped me out, and then the very next day, nope, he didn't know anything of it, and he stole from me. And then you see pictures of them or videos of them in the dugout, and they're talking and laughing. Like, I like you guys a lot, but if I found out that one of you stole the $4.5 million that I don't have, I don't think we would be jokey, ha-ha the next couple hours after that. Like, that's a lot of money. And I realize that he is a very wealthy man, but there's so much more to this. And like we said, we're recording this on Saturday. I'm sure more will come out soon. But I honestly think it's going to be a really long process because as of now, like they were reporting yesterday that the Dodgers and Ohtani's group haven't even reported it to authorities. So, there's something happening here. I don't know what it is. All of it's speculation, but it doesn't look great. And the only thing I hope is that there was no betting on baseball. Because I feel like if that is true, Ohtani's going to keep playing baseball. He might get a fine. He might get something like that. But if he bet on baseball, he's done.
My read of it is that he did not actually bet on baseball, but that there was something else. That seems to be the simplest thing, is that his friend got in some financial trouble, and he gave him money and didn't quite do it in a way that was, quote, legal. And that is obviously a problem, but it's not a baseball issue. It's a bookie issue that I hope, like you said, I hope that it's not actually something where he was betting on baseball, because that would be scandalous, right? I mean, and I say that in with a capital S, scandalous for baseball, and that would be bad as opposed to the lowercase. I don't know why that would be different if it was with a lowercase s.
Well, I mean, and the thing is, if he was betting on baseball, we do know at least he was betting for the Angels to win, because otherwise I don't know how he lost all that money.
How bad at gambling do you have to be to lose $4.5 million too? Like that's something that I feel like people aren't talking about enough. Like $4.5 million. And if it is the interpreter, when he started this, his salary was like $85,000. So I think I agree with Dan. I think the most likely story, again, this is total speculation on my part, but I think the actual story is the original one that the interpreter told, where Ohtani knew about it and was just helping him out. That seems like it makes the most sense. And then afterwards, Ohtani's camp was like, oh, shoot, this probably puts us in baseball's crosshairs. But I think even if that is the true story, I mean, all these are huge ifs, it's just going to be a fine. They're not going to suspend him for that.
I do think that what a lot of people are saying on X is accurate, that any other player in the league almost, if this comes out in this way, they're suspended immediately until the MLB can figure out what's going on.
They can't. The only way they can suspend someone immediately is the domestic violence thing. Otherwise, they have to wait until there's like a whole investigation and everything. So they actually cannot suspend him yet.
It's the MLB, Hoges. They can do what they want.
I mean, they can make up new rules, but yeah, that like how it is now, like that's what it is.
Hey, it wouldn't be the first time they made a new rule for Ohtani.
That wouldn't be the first time they just decided to make up a rule mid-season and be like, oh, you know how this is going? We don't like it. We're going to change it. Did the players have any input? No, they didn't. Did the owners? No. Manfred just decided.
He decided. But hey, he gave us the pitch clock, so we will forever be indebted to Manfred. But that being said, there are some new rules for 2024, not nearly as big as the rule changes for 2023. So we'll just go through them quick. The big thing that you'll notice is that with a runner on base last season, pitchers had 20 seconds on the pitch clock. That's going to be lowered down to 18 seconds. I don't really know how much that's going to matter, but I'm sure to some pitchers it matters. There's also going to be a wider running lane for runners going into first base. I think this will help a little bit with the runner interference when the catcher's trying to throw to first. Again, not a huge issue. And then the biggest one is not necessarily a rules change, but the MLB now encouraging umpires to be more aggressive in calling base blocking, primarily at second and third base. If you don't have the ball, you can't be putting your leg in front of the base, which honestly last season we had a couple of questions when things like that arose in Twins games where we're like, you can't do this at home plate, but you can at second and third. Why?
It's so stupid. I hate that part. What are they supposed to do? I don't understand how you're supposed to try to get a guy out if you can't if he can't just slide around you. Like, is that a problem? We just made the bases bigger. Like, they're big enough. Nobody is like putting their foot down literally in front of the base where a guy can't reach around it. Like, I guess this is a problem if you're sliding feet first into second base. But surely you can aim where your foot goes. Like, this is so ridiculous, and it's so arbitrary. If I'm an umpire, how am I supposed to choose to enforce this?
Well, hang on, real quick, just so I understand. You're upset that they're going to enforce it?
Yes, I am, because I think that it's a very difficult rule to enforce. I think you should be able to put your foot wherever you want to keep a runner from getting to the base. It's not like he's lifting him off Kent Herbeck style, right? I mean, like, this is... And I realize that's a controversial moment in Minnesota. It's a controversial read.
Not for us.
Moment in history.
But maybe in Atlanta it is, but not here.
So I don't know. Do you guys think... I just think this is going to cause all kinds of subjective issues of, like, what counts and what doesn't.
No,
I guess I'm more in a wait and see thing. Like, to me, it doesn't sound like a big deal now. But if they start really getting the part that bugs me is that when they call it when the guy doesn't have the ball, and it's like, where is he supposed to stand until he gets the ball? Like,
right.
Are we standing 2 feet away from the base and then running? And the other funny part of it is when I played baseball, we were taught to drop our leg at second base. Like if someone's coming to steal, you drop your left leg and then get ready to tag so they can't slide into the base. And you get people out all the time. Granted, my shins look like they've been cleated 1,000 times, but I mean, that's how we played back then.
Well, you also had like 3-inch spikes on the bottom of your shoes.
Metal
as well,
spikes. Right? We did.
Okay, I disagree with both of you heavily. I didn't foresee this perspective. I think that it was vital that they encourage the umpires to call this more aggressively, because if you're going to have the rule at home plate, you have to have some rule around the other bases. And the only issue I have with this is that there was a call in spring training made that they sort of showed as, hey, here's an example of what you can do and can't do. And I think the ump got it wrong, because for me, the play in question, the second baseman had the ball in his glove, and he put his glove in the path of the runner coming to second, which to me is legal. Like, because you just want to ensure you're going to tag the guy, so you're going to block his way to the plate with the ball. But they called him safe for interference because they said that the runner didn't have a lane to the base. But that's not how they're asking the rule to be called.
Well, but you just pointed out a moment where they messed it up. And I think that's going to happen a lot. So that's why I would rather you didn't even have the rule, because you're going to have so much arbitrariness. Because you're right. Like, a guy should be able to use his. How else is he supposed to tag the guy out if he can't like put his glove on the ground to tag him?
Yeah, I think part of the issue is the play is not reviewable. So if the umpire calls
There you
interference, they can't review it, they can't challenge it. But I do think that like it is difficult to watch a second baseman without the ball do exactly what Hoges described, which is just putting his leg in front of the bag, where it's like, again, if you can't do that at home plate, I don't think you should be able to do it at second and third. But where the subjectivity comes in is, are they playing the ball? Are they trying to put a tag on the guy, and so they're positioning themselves to do so? And I think that in more cases than not, I think that you, me, and Hoges could all look at 10 plays, and I think we'd agree on most of them, what would be blocking and what wouldn't be according to the rules.
I think we just go back to take away the Buster Posey rule and let them just run people over whenever they want to.
Also
then there's
an
no
option.
subjectivity.
That part, yeah, I would leave that part. But I think the rest of it, I will come back to the bigger bases. Like, okay, so let's make them a couple inches bigger so that there's more of a...
That's what you
More of
really
a
want. It really
little
is
bit
going to
bigger.
be... You're just going to be able to hop from first to second here pretty soon. You're going to get guys that are like really good long jumpers, and they're going to be baseball players because it's like, well, you can steal whenever you want.
You have kids playing, I just think about my kids growing up and playing at the park, and they're like, Dad, can I borrow the car cover for second base? Like, you got to like just lay it out.
Oh, man.
But anyway, folks, wow, we've kind of had a long intro here. A lot of things to talk about across the league. But thank you so much for tuning in. If you're a returning listener, thank you as always for the support. If you're a new listener, welcome to the show. Our typical format, we have an episode after every Twins series where we do recap and we talk through a whole bunch of different segments. This show obviously will not be that because we're not talking about Twins games. We're talking about our predictions for the season. So we'll go through some roster updates. We'll break down the season schedule a bit. And then what everybody's here for, to hear all of our incorrect predictions for the 2024 season.
Hey, speak for yourself, David. You've seen my predictions the last couple of years. They've been pretty spot on.
That doesn't sound right. Does that sound right to you, Dan?
I love revisionist history.
It's probably
the
more
best.
right than mine, so I can't speak up too much.
Just as the winners write history, Hoges, the keeper of the spreadsheet keeps the history of the podcast.
That is a solid point.
I think there's an edit history, though, we could go back to and really pinpoint like when David has gone back in time and revised.
Well, the fatal
Audit
flaw in
trail.
my plan is all of the podcasts are still live. Anybody can go back and listen to them.
all of a sudden we just see them re-uploaded with parts that they're just missing from before.
Why? What's this like 18 minutes? It's like Watergate. I don't know what it would be called.
Short
here,
episode that week.
Okay, well, a couple of quick roster updates before we get into the season schedule breakdown. So we are recording a bit early, so rosters haven't been locked for the season, but the position player side of things has been locked for a long time. And now that we know that, I don't even want to try and say his name, especially after last podcast, the way that Hoges was trying to say our supposed fifth starter's name. Desclafani? Is that close?
You did it. That was
Okay.
right.
I still can't spell it, but what are you going to do? But anyway, it sounds like he's going to be out for the season, and so Varland will pencil in as that fifth starter. So the starters are even sort of decided. It's really only the relievers that are in question, but I don't really think there's too many questions there either. It all comes down to whether they add one more flamethrower to the bullpen or if they go with a long relief guy. And I don't know that I really care that much. I think I'd probably lean long relief, even though it'd be more fun to have, another flamethrower at the back end of the pen.
I think you're right, David. I think they're going to end up doing another flamethrower because we saw last year, anytime they put in a long reliever in the bullpen, Rocco refused to use him. So what's the point? Let's just not even have him take up a roster space.
Absolutely agree. He doesn't. The way that Rocco manages is too random. Unless you're going to have a piggyback, which, quite honestly, we saw the piggyback work really well at the end of the year when Dallas Keuchel was involved. But I don't see that happening this year.
Well, I think that's a good point, and so maybe we will just see short relief guys. There was an interesting article on The Athletic where Rocco had made a point to say to all of the members of the bullpen, you will be called upon to pitch more than one inning. And so I suppose that speaks to not having a length guy if he's going to use guys who are normally one-inning guys as two-inning guys.
Yeah, and I don't hate that. When we have these really solid, high leverage guys, throw them out there for 2 innings because we have a deep bullpen. So if you can't use them the next day, I think that's okay. Really get their usage up in those 1 games, and maybe that'll help their longevity too. If they're not pitching as many, maybe they're pitching a little bit longer, but not as many days in a row. Because as we've seen very, very clearly with Twins pitchers in the last few years, back-to-back days and outings just doesn't seem to go well for any of them.
I think that's probably the correct perspective. And I do want to say, last episode when you guys did sort of the confidence poll for how much you have confidence in each group, I would say that for the most part, I think both of you did a really good job. The only thing is, Rocco's management I thought was funny. Dan loves having this as a category. Now, if you're a longtime listener to the show, Dan loves to include Rocco's grade in the series grade that he does this whole breakdown. It's this mathematical formula. The thing is, though, if you look at his math, you can tell he's an English teacher, right? Like how he gets to his particular
Oh my gosh!
grade.
I have a. Can you stop? I have a new system that I'm going to unveil.
Oh my goodness.
Does that surprise you? What did you expect?
I can just see Dan at his high school, like in the math department teachers lounge, like being like, "Hey guys, could you help me? I need a new system here." And I don't want him to make fun of my math again this year.
Unreal. I'm adapting. I'm trying to get better. I'm trying to come up with the perfect grading system, and it's impossible. I'm just going to work my way. It's like an asymptote, right? Where you slowly work your way toward it, but you never actually approach it. That's my rubric.
For making fun of Dan, I would have told you that was a science term. So I guess I could kind of show.
Thank you, Hoges. That's a good term. I think it's a great analogy.
I'm really happy that Hoges said it was a math term because hey, this podcast, you can say a lot about this podcast, but you can't deny it's educational.
Well, anyone who watches Mean Girls or who has watched Mean Girls knows what an asymptote is too. So you got
the limit does not exist. The limit does not exist.
Exactly. That's what it is, David. That's what an asymptote is.
Sorry, I was thinking about Eric's hair. What's the guy's name? I forget the guy's name. Anyway, well, we have strayed a little bit here, boys, off topic. But a couple of injury updates too. Brooks Lee left Major League camp to minor league camp after it was announced that he was having back spasms. It was a weird move because it made it seem like they were related somehow because of the timing. I don't really think so. Like, the Twins are just starting to cut the roster down to size. Further, Max Kepler has pectoral tightness. He was scratched from the game on Wednesday, but it seems like he's fine. I don't think he's going to be heading to the IL to start the season. So again, things are pretty much looking how they're going to look come the season opener.
Yeah, and I think it was really encouraging to see Buxton out there just a couple days after he had those back issues too. So hopefully that truly was a non-issue and we don't see it flare up again later.
Well, with that, boys, let's go ahead and jump into the season schedule breakdown. Some interesting notes about your schedule for your Minnesota Twins.
Yeah, so a few notes. The Twins have the weakest strength of schedule in the league by the 2023 records. That's according to Jason Stark from The Athletic. They also have the fewest games versus winning teams by that same metric, which is 73, which is 11 fewer than the next closest, who is, of course, the Tigers, the Royals, and the Guardians. So I think we can kind of see why that is. Even with a slightly more balanced schedule, it still shakes out that way. And then 28 of the Twins' first 34 games are against teams ranked 20th or worst in the preseason rankings. So, which is very opposite to how it was last year, if I recall, where they had a bit of a more difficult first couple months.
Yeah, I had said that if they left May at 500, it was going to be a really fun season to watch, and that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, it kind of makes me a little bit more nervous because I loved having that in the back of my head. Not to give you too much credit, David, but I loved having that in the back of my head all last year when they kind of started off a little bit slower. I'm like, David said 500 in June, we're fine. If we make it to June and we're 500, we're fine. And this year I'm going to be, the schedule the rest of the way isn't all that horrible either. But I'm gonna want a little bit more this year. There's a little more pressure on the boys to start off this season.
I think 3 or 4 game lead by the end of this first trek through the poor side of the schedule. I don't think that's unrealistic.
Yeah, so the beginning, I guess the big, I don't want to say hurdles, but the most intriguing series early on is going to be that series against the Dodgers, which is their 4th series. So that's kind of in really early April. And then the series at the Orioles a week later. Other than that, it's Royals, Brewers, Guardians, Tigers, White Sox, Angels, White Sox, Red Sox, which is, again, doesn't look that daunting. Which I guess is encouraging.
But you do know that, this happens every year, and baseball does have a decent amount of parity. There are going to be teams that we don't think are very good that are going to play a lot better than they are, than we think that they are. And it'll be the same. It'll go the other way too for some teams. So you can read into this some, but there's always going to be that, maybe this team who didn't spend any money, their guys just click. Their young guys do really well, and they're more of a threat than we originally would have thought. So
I think people are higher on the Orioles than they should be. Overrated. That's what I think. But I know that a lot of guys are really high on them. I don't see them continuing what they did last season. Maybe I'm off base, but that's where I'm feeling on them right now.
Yeah, not to go down an Oriole hole, but like the Corbin Burns trade makes me think that they are going to be a little bit better than last year. And everyone says that their farm system is the absolute best, but I guess we'll see. The AL East is a tough division, and you got to think the Yankees are going to be better than they were last year.
I think that's a good point, Hoges, because where we have, the teams we mentioned, the Royals, the Guardians, the White Sox, I mean, they've got the Blue Jays, they've got the Red Sox, who are kind of in that same boat where they're not going to be that bad forever, you would think. So we will see. Though at the same time, there's a stretch where it's like the Twins play the Rockies, the A's, and the Pirates. That seems pretty safely. You can quote me on this later, I suppose, but that end of or mid-June stretch seems like a nice respite.
I think we can put that one in ink. I don't think either of those teams are going to be well. Well, now we're both on record, I guess, for David to come back and be like, you guys thought these teams were going to be awful.
I guess what concerns me more is sort of the second segment of the season, if we're going to break it up this way, where after that initial stretch of 34 games where they're playing some really weak opponents outside of the Dodgers and the Orioles, the next 29 games, they're going to see the Astros, the Rangers, the Blue Jays, the Mariners, and the Yankees twice. So last season, sort of the parameter that I set that Hoges had just said was if they get through May and they're at 500, we're looking in good shape for baseball. I would say this season, it's a little bit later. I would say if they can get to the beginning of July, I think that they're in good shape to finish the season with a good record. But there is a very painful piece right at the start of the school year where they have to, at the end of August, they see the Braves, then they see the Blue Jays, and then they see the Rays, which if last year proves to be correct and they continued their streak this year, that's going to be a gauntlet here that could really impact the Twins, especially if there is a race happening for the AL Central.
Well, and even before that, the 3 series prior are the Rangers, the Padres, and the Cardinals. And you got to think for the same reasons that the Padres and the Cardinals, is one of those teams will be better than it was, and the Rangers are the defending champs.
I don't think the Padres will ever figure it out, so I'm less concerned about them.
Yeah, the dads just always have a rough go about, hey, but maybe cutting payroll, getting rid of Soto and Snell, they'll be better this year.
Yeah, for some reason. I have always had a soft spot for the Padres because my first Little League team, when they're still doing like the MLB names, was the Padres. And so that, I always have this little soft spot. And I have a little baseball card, with me in a Padres uniform. So
that's really funny you say that because my first Little League team, I was the Dodgers. And for whatever reason, I kind of root for the Dodgers, which is such a, bandwagon team to be rooting for. Yes. But it's because of my Little League roots.
Yeah, and I just cheer for the Yankees because they win a lot.
Don't you ever? No. If you want me to lose more respect for you than you possibly could, that is how you do it. Honest, and I'm not even really joking. I cannot stand people who do that. I'm just like the Yankees because I like the NY and they've won a lot. No, I like the Patriots. No.
I do like that the way that Hogue started that sentence made it sound like he has no respect for me to begin with.
I had no respect for the character you were emulating right there, David. I have respect for you.
This is like David's list of reasons that he would end our friendship. He's got categories of these.
He legitimately does have this. This is not fake.
I have a list.
It's like the other tab
multiple times. You have mentioned it multiple times.
I can't be held responsible for what past David said. Well, with that, boys, let's look at the schedule. And we do this every season, and it's a fun exercise. This was a Dan Thompson originating perspective, I think. And I think that part of it is Dan travels a lot, and so he's thinking this way. What path would you take, and which games would you want to see if you could design a road trip for this season?
Before we start this, I still can't get over how last year, David, who hates being hot, just hates being hot, decided he wanted to go to Arlington, Texas in August, and that was his dream road trip.
I mean, the stadium is air-conditioned, right? So if he just stays there the whole time.
Teleport into it, though. You still have to get in there.
I look at this schedule, so I'm going to sound a little cranky, but it's not that beautiful in terms of road trips and in terms of the elegance of the scheduling has gone away. I think once they started doing this, a little bit more by machine, because you look at, they only have a couple 3-city road trips. They've got the Astros, Yankees, Pirates, and then they've got the A's, Diamondbacks, Mariners. And none of that is geographically pleasant, right? How do you go from Houston to New York to Pittsburgh in a timely manner without flying, I guess? So I guess to me, that would be the pick. It would be to do that one because it's 3 in a row. And those are 3 pretty cool places to be, I would think. Though it is early June, Houston doesn't sound all that pleasant weather-wise.
I'm in the same area, but I would go Athletics, Diamondbacks, Mariners. And like I understand that those are kind of far away, but to your point, Dan, there is not a lot of options for road trips that would be fun and reasonable with the way that the scheduling works. And again, like you said, it's because they can fly planes. And I should note out too, shout out to listener Dan, who sent us an article about why the schedule is 162 games. Dan Thompson was very confused about this, and
I
listener
wasn't
Dan explained.
confused. It was a different kind of question. It was like, why did they pick that number? And I get it. Okay, anyway, thank you, Dan. I'm not trying to slander the idea.
Explaining the way that the leagues had started and like the math worked out so it was a balanced schedule. But so Dan Thompson was offended, I guess, that a listener wrote in and gave us the explanation for the question that Dan was asking. But he didn't answer it exactly the way that Dan
never
wanted.
write in again.
Yes. We'd like to discourage listener participation in the show as much as possible. We really just record this so we can listen back.
Oh my God.
Self-serving. Well, I'm going to kind of cheat a little bit. So I am actually going out to Pittsburgh to watch the Twins this year. That's my annual road trip. We're going to watch them play the Pirates. And we did talk about going to the New York series right before because it's not that bad of a drive from New York. But yeah, I agree with what both of you guys said. Like, it's hard to really find 3 in a row. And, I mean, even with what I'm doing, we're not even going to go to New York before we're just going to the Pittsburgh series. So I think that one is kind of the best little range that you have this year.
I guess for me, the Twins they're hosting teams that I haven't seen their road stadium before as much. You know, this is a year where I've been to a lot of them. So that's the other part, because you always want to see a new park. Like I guess I would probably pick that, Hoges, in the sense that I would love to be able to see Pittsburgh. I haven't been to the new Yankee Stadium, and actually haven't been to Houston's either. So I guess that's another reason why that one is alluring to me, even though the distance from Houston to New York is so vast.
It's about as far apart as you could get as far as the schedule is concerned.
Do you know, though, David, I mean, really, like, how many states are between Texas and New York? Can you tell us?
I mean, it's mostly just Mississippi, right? I think it's just cut right across.
I love David's geography.
Oh,
That's my
gosh.
favorite.
I will always struggle. I think that's probably why I make fun of math for you, Dan, so much, because I struggle in virtually every subject, so I need to like take some cheap shots where I can. Well, I think with that, boys, it's time. We can only put it off for so long with other topics and discussions. It's time for our season predictions. I am very excited. So sometimes when I'm putting together the spreadsheet, we try and hide our answers from each other. And sometimes when I'm in the course of putting things together, I've like accidentally seen things in seasons past. Like I don't like look at all of them, but you maybe catch one on accident. I haven't seen any of yours at all. So I'm quite excited to see these as they go. I'm curious if we're very alike or very different, but I don't know. I'm just very excited because I'm optimistic on the season. Spoiler alert.
Do you guys feel good about your predictions? Like,
No.
I've thought about mine for like 2 weeks, and I don't feel confident in any of them, and it feels very different from years past, and I'm trying to spin this positively. I think it's because I think a lot of guys are going to have really good years, so it's hard for me to pick which one. So that's what I'm telling myself, but this was way more difficult than I remember it being.
Yeah, I've got a few in there where I'm like, if this is true and then this is true, then that would have to be true. But I don't think that that's all going to be true. So then I hedged a little bit. So there's going to be some in here we're going to say, but Dan, it won't be quite the way that it was last year for David when he picked Byron Buxton to hit like 70 home runs.
50 home runs, 120 RBIs, and bat for the OPS of 1,100, and he's not the
Carlos Correa,
MVP.
Like, what, David? This doesn't add up at all.
I had that in the back of my mind the whole time I was doing it. I'm like, I'm pulling a David again. So I guess we'll get to it. But yeah, I kind of pulled the David again.
I want to build championship culture.
He's ready. He is ready this season, boys. Okay, well, we're going to go in order of the spreadsheet here. So we're going to start with most home runs, and we'll go each section will go in order. It'll go Dan, and then myself, and then Hoges will round out. And so, Hoges, you're sort of the honorary listener predictions also. I was going to crowdsource each of the different
You're going to put that
options,
on them?
but it was going to take forever. So I decided not to do that. So now, Hoges, if people don't like what you've picked,
Why are you putting that on me? And now I'm going to feel even more nervous about these. To be fair, I did do a lot of crowdsourcing for my actual picks, so there's a few people that had input.
It works out. You're all worried about being the scapegoat, but you did your due diligence. We're okay.
All right, so the first so we have some hitting categories, and then we have some pitching categories. We also then have season MVP, season LVP, and then a crazy prediction. which I think last year was my most accurate thing. So we'll see.
Mine was
if
the most inaccurate. Well, I mean, no, I think most of mine were inaccurate. But that one was Nick Gordon was going to have the most plate appearances, and Nick Gordon had like 4 plate appearances on the season.
So the first one is most home runs. I will start, and this is going to shock people, I am sure. Regular listeners are going to think there's no way Dan would pick Byron Buxton to hit 38 home runs, but that's exactly what I picked.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good right there.
I do like that Dan has picked Byron Buxton, and I do like that his number is almost as ridiculous as mine. But here's the thing. I was trying to sort of offer some redemption for myself after last year's perspective. So I also took Byron Buxton, but at a more reasonable 32 home runs, not the 89 I said last season.
But I can always talk myself into picking Byron Buxton for something, right? So like it was a different process this year, right? Last year, I don't remember who I picked last year. It probably was Byron Buxton. But I thought, if he's going to really play center field for 130 games, and he's going to be at the plate that much. I mean, look how well he hit at the beginning of last year when he was broken, right? Like, he's not going to be broken this year, guys. He's going to finally break through with the grand 38 home run season that I've predicted.
I'm just stunned by David's pick. Like that shocks me. Like David, you are like the king of the off the like if Dan is on like the conductor of the Buxton train, you're the one like standing in front of it, waving your arms, trying to get it to stop. I mean, I'm excited about that. Like I'm glad that you've come around and you're thinking that he's going to have a better year. But I actually broke it up a little bit. I went with the wonder child and picked Royce Lewis with 34 home runs. I've seen way too many grand slams not to be drinking that Kool-Aid, and it's spring training, so that's when you drink the Kool-Aid, so we're going with Royce.
Can I ask a follow-up?
He's the one.
I'm going to ask then, Hoges, how many of those will be grand slams?
I think 31 will be grand slams. The one thing that gets ignored, and I know this is like David's whole, like, you buy a red truck, you see a red truck, and that's 100% true, but he comes up to bat with the bases loaded so much. Like, that's the crazy thing. Like, how does it even happen that often? It's wild.
I have to say, overall, those seem reasonable. I mean, to some extent, it's not crazy what we put forth. So I think that bodes well for the rest of the segments here.
Oh,
We've
man.
matured.
This is fascinating. Batting average, boys. We've all picked different people. This is such a great reveal, right? Not knowing these things. I'm going to start with mine. I'm going to continue with Royce here. I think Royce is going to be a very effective hitter. I mean, I think he's going to hit 304, and that's going to lead the team. And I was thinking through, Hoges, you made the point, too, that, like, you think a lot of guys could have really good years. I think that Royce Lewis is going to demonstrate not just his ability to hit grand slams, but his ability to work at bats. I just think he's going to have a really good all-around year at the plate, even if I don't think he's going to hit as many grand slams. I think that was just a bit of a fluke.
I think that this batting average is too high.
304?
Yes.
Is that because you don't think it's like modernly possible unless you're Luis Ariz to hit 300?
I think that the team leader last season was Donovan Solano at 282. So
No, it was Correa. Remember, don't take that away from me. It was Correa with like 220 or something like that.
I just think that the way that Royce Lewis bats, I think that he's less of a high average guy, and he likes to hit for a lot of power, and naturally that means you're going to have a lower batting average more often than not. And so I think that picking Royce, first of all, I don't think Royce will lead the team in batting average. I don't think it's like crazy to think that it could happen. I just don't foresee that happening. But I think that 304 is just too high. When again, that's like 25 points higher than our leader last season.
Yep, David, though, 58 games for Royce last year. He batted 309.
Okay,
See?
Dear goodness. Every time. Why do we have to do this every time? Hoges is like, you were saying that Royce Lewis is Kirby Puckett. I said he smiled like Kirby and he was infectious as a player. And Hoges takes that to mean that I am leading the Royce Lewis train. And it drives me nuts because all I'm trying to say is he hasn't played that many games. And you guys act like he's been in the league for 10 years and he's been this constant all-star. He just started. But
you
he's
can't
like, in 50
excited?
games last
Oh,
season,
man.
he hit so many grand slams. You can't extrapolate that. You're telling me he's going to hit 12 grand slams this season, Hoges? My goodness.
No, I said 31, actually. But I agree with you. I 100% agree with you. But you have to agree with me that it was a pretty darn good 58 games.
We're
allowed to be excited about that.
Objectively, of course, I think there was a great 58 games. What I'm saying is you can't expect that over the course of 162.
I think about 7 games into that, like David was calling him Rurby Luckett,
Or Coyce Pewis.
Like it wasn't that. Like that's the part we don't get, David. And I also would like, why can't that be predictive of how he's going to play over the course of an entire season?
That we changed his name to rhyme with Kirby Puckett.
Like, yeah, 58 games is a sample size. It's not 10. It's not like we're saying, oh, Trevor Larnach like hit 3 home runs and batted .350 over 1 week in June. Like that doesn't. Yes, this is a significant sample size, enough to be able to have some hope for this next season.
It's not half a season, Dan.
I think this
How
is
is
the
that a significant sample size? What are you talking about?
What would be a
Folks,
significant sample size?
You work in pharmaceuticals. Are you telling me that a drug trial, you had 3 guys take the pill, you're like, send it to market. Nobody died.
That's all we do. Don't tell anyone, though. David, I think this is the feistiest the podcast has ever been about something that we all essentially agree on. David, we argue enough as it is. We don't need to argue about stuff that we agree on.
Oh my goodness! You guys both know you are antagonistic towards me in this regard because you know that I'm frustrated.
That's my purpose.
Well, yes, there is some days I wake up with the idea in my head that you were put on this earth, Hoges, to be a thorn in my side.
All right, well, David, how about you give us your batting average prediction?
Okay, I have a much more reasonable prediction here. Eddie Julien with a 287 average.
Oh, Canada.
Which again, I think if anything, I was conservative in my average for him, but I do think that he'll lead the team, and even if he does get over 300, I would be shocked by that. I just don't see that happening in the way the game is played today. Hitting 300 is definitely an anomaly now, as opposed to the norm, even for some of the best guys in the league.
I do think that the way that Rocco uses Eddie Julien certainly suggests that he will have a higher batting average than some of the other guys, because I think he's more likely to pull Eddie Julien than he is to pull really any of his righties, quite honestly. Like, I think that the guys like, Hoges, a little bit of a spoiler, like you picked a different righty. I just think that Royce is going to be up a little bit more in situations where Rocco won't have the hook. Also because like Eddie Julien has the natural pairing with Kyle Farmer.
Yeah, I really like your pick, David. Honestly, like I almost want to switch to Julien after seeing what you put up there. I think he just hits for average. Like, he's such a good hitter and he walks a lot, so he's a good guy to pick there. But I went with Correa. I think that plantar fasciitis was really hurting him a lot. I think he's really, really, really motivated to kind of turn around what everyone said. I mean, it wasn't off here last year. He still performed pretty well, especially in the playoffs. But look at what those 2 weeks off, and again, this is an incredibly small sample size, but look at what those 2 weeks off did before the playoffs. And I think he batted .450 or something like that in the postseason. I think he's going to have a pretty good turnaround here, and we'll get to that more as my picks progress. But I had Correa at 295.
Just for a little bit of perspective here, if Julien bats .304 last season, that would have made him the guy with the 9th highest batting average in the league.
That's possible. That's not like top 2 or 3. That's reasonable.
Well, and we're not going to strike out record-breaking times this year, right?
Well, I mean, now that Joey Gallo's not on the team. I love that Dan doesn't think putting Royce Lewis as the 9th best batting average in the majors is not unreasonable. I'm not saying it's impossible.
Unreasonable.
No, but again, the stat line is what bothers me. The 304, knowing where that.
So what would be the number then? What number would you feel like? Oh, Dan, okay, I understand that.
302.
I think like 280, like 285. I think would be reasonable. I don't think he'll lead the team. Obviously, that's not what I predicted. But I just think that would be a big step forward for Royce Lewis to be batting at a 305 clip, knowing how Major League Baseball is structured.
But it technically would be a step back, though, David, because he batted higher last year.
Folks, oh my goodness. Will you please stop? My goodness.
All right, on base percentage. So I picked Eddie Julien, which I guess makes sense to kind of the logic that you guys have had. I think he's going to get on base a lot. I picked him with a 385 on base percentage, which, David, is really not that different than what you picked.
No, yeah, so I'm at 395. So we're very close here for on-base percentage. I think everything that you guys have said is true. I think that Julian is going to get absolutely the best opportunities to succeed in this regard. I think he's going to get on base a lot. And then clearly, Royce Lewis will hit him home with a grand slam virtually every time he gets on base.
See, this is annoying me here because I basically forgot about Eddie Julian when I was doing these predictions. And I really like your guys' pick here again. But you know what? I'm sticking to my guns. I'm going with it. I picked Correa with 360. I think he'll get on base a lot more. He does have a good eye at the plate. I know that that's a lower number to still lead the team, but this team strikes out so many times, and Correa isn't necessarily the leader in that category. I don't think he's going to ground into so many double plays again either, so there's going to be maybe a few more infield hits like we saw in the postseason. So, yeah, I went with Correa at 360.
To me, if he does that, it speaks to in a way to the depth of this team, because if you got a guy behind you like Byron Buxton, what am I trying to say?
Sometimes I'll start a sentence and I don't even know where it's going. I just find it along the way.
I do think that Byron Buxton's health will help everybody. I do think that number's a little bit low to lead the team. I think somebody's going to be able to have a better on-base percentage. I don't think that bodes as well as you might think it does, Hoges, because surely somebody can get on base a little bit more than 36 times in every 100 at-bats.
I hope I'm wrong. I think that Julian is a solid pick. I just think Correa is going to pick it up quite a bit. And then we can have this whole argument down the road about what actually qualifies as on-base percentage, because Julian for sure isn't, according to MLB rules. So I'm saving that one in the bag for later.
All right, well, Hoges, we should look at OPS, and I think you need to lead us off here with this OPS number, because that OPS number is notable.
The more and more I thought about it, I think, and we'll see this as we get on, I think Buxton is going to have a great year. And I looked at the peaks that he's had in his career. I didn't even do this on purpose to annoy David. I swear I didn't. In those very small sample sizes, he has had an OPS over 1,000. So I picked Byron Buxton
Oh my goodness, guys. Seriously. Enough.
I picked Buxton with a 980 OPS.
That's a really high OP. Like, that's MVP level OPS, isn't it?
Okay.
In 2021, with a whopping 61 games played, his OPS was 1.005. He batted 306, and he hit 20 home runs.
Oh, my gosh.
He has that in him. I'm extrapolating those 61 to 161.
Okay. Again, to put this in perspective, clearly, did you guys look like you understand how baseball stats work, right? Like, this is every single guy that you've given a stat line to would be an MVP candidate at this rate. So that would put Buxton 6th in the league last season with OPS. Now, Dan, you made it sound like Hoges' number was astronomical. Go ahead with yours. It's not that much better.
My number is significantly lower. I did pick Byron Buxton with a 915. Where would that rank, since you have the rankings up?
Yeah, 915 would rank him 9th.
Okay, what's unreasonable about that? If we think the Twins are at least a top 10 team in baseball, wouldn't it make sense that their best hitter would have an OPS like in the top 10? This isn't that weird. I think, if anything, David, you're the one who's low on these predictions for being so high on the Twins.
I guess looking at the Twins and looking at the roster, there are some guys who could be great this season. I guess I was thinking our predictions would be reasonable and not just assume that every guy on the diamond, like the All-Star game is for the AL, is going to be all Twins players. I think that's not the perspective that I took. You two obviously took a different perspective, which is fine. It's what makes the podcast entertaining, I suppose. I went with Ryan Jeffers at .870.
That's
which
so
again,
low. What would that have ranked?
8.
Okay. Like 49th, I bet.
It would rank him 12th. It would rank him 12th in the league, which I thought was high.
Is that among qualified players, or is that among,
Yes.
okay. So right there's a caveat, right? Because you're cutting out a significant portion of the Twins, right, who didn't qualify last year.
Almost all.
That's how you're gauging these perspectives? is which players didn't qualify for the stat lines.
Well,
so
I'm
your
just
argument is they would be lower. Buxton with a 980 would be lower because guys who would have more plate appearances would qualify with higher OPSs than the ridiculous number that you two have put forth.
Hoges, can you defend this? Because I think you understand what I'm trying to say.
Nobody understands what you're trying to say.
I like David's pick, actually. I wanted Jeffers for a lot of these categories. I don't like his number. That makes me a little sad. But I wanted Jeffers for a lot of these categories. I just couldn't bump him up over someone else. But to Dan's point, yes, if you have Jeffers isn't going to qualify for OPS.
That's my point.
If we're going to use my argument that I used the entire end of the year last year, he's technically not going to qualify.
Okay.
Right, because the way that the Twins manage deflates the plate appearances, which is the metric that they use, right, to qualify for all these things.
Not to steal David's argument against us. So far, other than you picking Julian, we've all picked righties who are actually most likely going to qualify.
Fair point. Fair point.
Okay. Can we move? Did we all do this? Are we done with this particular category?
We did.
This is the stat line that I would have outside of Dan's batting average of 304, which I guess is possible. But I do think that this OPS number is a bit inflated. It's not 2019, guys, okay? We're not hitting, the Twins aren't combining for 307 home runs. That's not going to happen this season.
But could it be more like 2020?
2021 or 2021 when Buxton had a 1.005 OPS.
In 4 games, Hoges. In 4 games. My goodness.
What is an acceptable sample size to you? 700 games, and then can we start getting excited, or somewhere in between the two?
I would say 2 seasons worth of baseball is reasonable to start making some accurate projections about how a player can succeed in this league.
Well, Buxton really only has 1 full season, so it's hard.
He barely has that.
What about a sample size?
He had 140 games.
That's not bad. What about a sample size of 6,930 at bats with a batting average of 306? 923 RBI, and an OPS of .827. What would you think of that sample size, David?
Yeah, Dan's just going through, okay, how many games did Nelson Cruz play? Okay, how many games did Jim Thome play? Like, how many of these guys can I point to?
No, Hoges knows who I'm reading off there.
I actually don't.
That was Joe Mauer's career stat line right there.
I don't know
and you
why
missed it, David.
We gotta cut that. I can't be on record as not knowing that stat line.
It's like written like around your son's like room, like a rap,
right?
Like it's like a ticker.
All right, with that,
man.
let's push forward to best ERA for starters here. Dan, why don't you start us off?
Again, a very reasonable pick. I'm going with Pablo Lopez at 3.25. I think that number is about what I would, if that's the ERA of the Twins' leading starter, then I feel like it was a decent year for that person. I just think Pablo Lopez is the most likely to be that guy.
Yeah, I agree. I think that Pablo Lopez will lead. I'm going lower in ERA, and I would argue that this is my stat line that I'm probably the least confident in as far as a prediction. I just think that Pablo Lopez has the ability to be that ace, to be into that upper echelon group. I was super annoyed. In The Athletic, they did this whole article where they broke down the starting pitchers into like 5 categories of like true aces, and then there's like the inner circle, and then there's guys who could be aces, and then there's this group 4 and 5. Pablo Lopez they put in group 4, and I'm like, did you watch last season? I'm so confused how he's in group 4 out of 5 here. But I have Lopez as an ERA of 2.95. I think that he is going to be just as successful, if not more so, than last season. I just think that he has the stuff to do it, and he has the defense, especially on the infield side of things. With the addition of Santana, I think is important at first base. I think that guy is going to pitch wonderfully, and I'm very excited to watch him this season.
So a 2.95 ERA would have ranked 5th in the majors last year.
David, where did he rank in the majors last season, Dan?
Well, he's not in the top 10, but Sonny Gray was in the top 3. His ERA was 2.79. Man, Blake Snell, 2.25 was number 1, and then Garrett Cole was second at 2.63. So you're putting, I would say you're describing a Cy Young candidate year from Pablo Lopez if that happens.
And I truly believe that. And I don't think that where he finished last season, I don't see any reason why he couldn't be a touch better this season. I really do think that he could be a Cy Young candidate.
David is stuck with this, too, because when we talked about Twins that have the best potential to be Hall of Famers, he listed Pablo Lopez as one of his guys that he thought had, not saying that he was going to, David, I don't want to put words into your mouth, but you did say that there was an opportunity for him to get there. I hope you guys are right. I don't, and I can't even explain it. I have nothing to prove it. I feel like he's going to regress a little bit this year. I feel like last year he kind of, specifically at the end of the year in the postseason, he outperformed where I would expect him to be. I mean, his ERA last year was only 3.66, and he had 194 innings pitched. He needs to be able to sustain that for us to have success this year. I'm just a little nervous about the weight that's on his shoulders right now, but I hope that you guys are right. I went a little bit of a different route. I went with Bailey Ober when I was kind of comparing just the stats that these guys have. Bailey Ober's stats are phenomenal. Again, I'm going small sample size again, but he's a young guy. He doesn't have that much behind him. Last year, he had an ERA of 3.43. He only pitched in 144 innings. But I think they're going to let him loose a little bit more. They were building him up because in 2022, when he was just doing spot starts, he only pitched 56 innings. His ERA was 3.21. I think that guy has the stuff if he can stay healthy and if the Twins kind of let him go and pitch a little bit longer. I'm hoping for good things for him. I think he's going to end up being our number 2 starter this year, maybe even number 1 at the end of the year. I picked Bailey Ober 3.20.
If that's Bailey Ober's ERA, this Twins team will make some noise in the postseason, honestly, because I think that this front office, come the trade deadline, if the Twins perform the way that we expect them to, they're going to have to trade away a couple of pieces that might hurt a little bit to get another starter. Now, keep in mind, there are still starters that could help this team if they spent some money right now. Keep in mind also, Blake Snell signed a ridiculous deal that anybody in the majors should have taken. Now, I understand the arguments that, no, he wanted to be on a coast. He wouldn't want to come to Minnesota. I don't care.
Please attempt to be a gentleman.
You know what happened. Pohlads went in there and offered him the Dome Dog recipe that he's so fond of, as opposed to money, and he expected that to even be considered. No, it's ridiculous. Ownership, I don't understand. The fundamental piece of building a winning baseball team is having a farm system that can produce both pitchers and hitters. Short of that, you need to dip into the free agency pool. All you need right now is guys who can pitch from a frontline starting perspective, and there were plenty of guys who fit that bill this offseason. We haven't even mentioned the ownership this whole episode, so that's why I'm feeling like we need to insert it here, that this front office had a great opportunity, but they decided to lie to the fan base about streaming options, tell them that they couldn't increase the payroll because of that TV deal falling through, and then after the TV deal was in place, they still wouldn't spend the money and said that if they're going to stand by their situation and their perspective, that they needed to cut payroll. It's ridiculous. It's insulting. And look at the success we had last season. Why on earth wouldn't you want to invest in that? It drives me absolutely insane.
Think about how much, I mean, I agree with absolutely everything you said there, but think about how much better this rotation and this team as a whole looks with a guy like Snell or Montgomery in it.
Yes.
For not even the part that gets me so mad is it wasn't a long-term commitment.
No.
Like the thing with these starter deals is you end up having to give a guy $300 million and they're not going to be good at the end of that, or they're going to get Tommy John for one of it. This was a 2-year commitment. Like, if you told me that at the beginning of the year, I would have jumped on that so fast. I would have been like, like you said, every single team in baseball should have been offering that.
Even a guy like Michael Lorenzen, I think, just got a 1-year, $4.5 million deal, which you can't tell me that's not worth the flyer, but you're going to trade for Desclafani and be on the hook for $4 million, and he's not going to pitch at all.
And David, you're right, too, because we're going to get to the trade deadline, and they're going to give up a prospect to get a frontline starter because we're going to be in this mix. And it's so stupid because we don't need to do that right now. All it costs you right now is money. It doesn't cost you players. Like, I'm dreading and excited for that episode of the trade deadline when they inevitably do this and you lose your mind because it's going to happen.
Or worse, it doesn't. They're leading the AL by like 9 games, and they're like, oh, we'll be fine come the postseason. No. If the Twins are in a position to make the postseason and make a solid run, if you do not make a trade, it's ridiculous at that point.
Well, let's go on to the relievers. Hoges, that's quite the number that you've got there.
I went low. Well, last year you guys criticized me because I went too high. So this year I think I overcorrected a little bit, but I don't think I overcorrected. I'm not even going to hedge my bet. Duran, 1.97 ERA. I think he is going to have a phenomenal year. I think that he got like that push in the playoffs where he realized that he could just shut people down. He excelled in those high pressure moments. It was so fun watching him. Like having a closer where he goes out and you feel like you won. We have that with him. I'm a little worried about the oblique, but like we talked about in the last podcast, it's not his arm. Those injuries can linger, like Dan said, but I think he's going to be okay. And I think he's going to have, not only does he have the stuff, I think he has the mentality this year, which is going to lead to a really low ERA.
David, you picked him too. That's such a low ERA. It's a sub-2 ERA is, it's not Mariano Rivera stuff, but like that's really, really low.
Overrated.
Are you talking about Mariano Rivera, a first ballot, 100% Hall of Famer? David, is that what you're talking about?
I just hope there's a Yankee fan listening. I just got to poke the bear a little bit. But so, yeah, I went with Duran also. I went with a 2.42 ERA, which I think is more reasonable. If again, that prediction is correct from Hoges, that will be, I mean, he'll go down in history as having one of the best seasons as a closer ever. I mean, that's how
his career. His career ERA is 2.15, and in 57 appearances in 2022, he had a 1.86 ERA.
I think we all know that that's not a big enough sample size for David.
If this episode
that's a
titled,
full year of being a reliever.
If the episode of this title is not sample size, I don't know. I don't know what it should be.
So I was looking at the team's ERAs last year, and from a relief standpoint, Duran led the team with a 2.45 ERA, and then next was Emilio Pagan at 2.99, which I cannot believe.
It's hilarious. I love that.
He got paid a ridiculous amount of money this offseason.
He got paid like Blake Snell money practically.
So I went with a different name and a different number. I went with Griffin Jax with an ERA of 2.75. I don't know if you've seen what he's done to his sweeper or slider or slurve or whatever we call it. But the ball starts at a player's head and it drops like to his right ankle, like across the plate. Like it's a remarkable pitch that he's added. And I think he's going to be really difficult to hit.
The problem with this prediction is you're not taking into account all of the weird plays that are going to happen with Griffin Jax on the mound. So he's going to give up 4 or 5 doubles because it bounces off an umpire. I'm sure there'll be some ground rule doubles that bounce off security guards. There'll be a couple of home runs he gives up to guys bunting because for some reason when Griffin Jax is on the mound, physics no longer apply. There's something about that guy that he has the worst luck. He gets the worst bounces. I think I am so jaded because of like all of the bad things that have happened to him on the mound. I have such a hard time viewing him as like this powerhouse guy. But every single article says that he's in the back end of this bullpen and he's the guy who's going to shut things down. I just have a hard time believing it when you're putting a guy out there who apparently gravity doesn't exist when he's pitching.
I think what's hard about this category is there's so many new relievers, and relievers are kind of so weird. You know, like you can have one great year as a reliever and you can have some terrible years as a reliever too. And I'm curious to see how the tweaking of all of these relievers and what the coaches are trying to get them to do, because it always seems like a reliever adds a pitch, or they go to drive line and they add a couple spins to their spin rate or something like this. And so
then they turn in their tickets for candy. It's great.
Yeah. So I just didn't, quite honestly, I didn't know quite who to pick, and I didn't want to pick Duran because I thought somebody else is going to pop this year and have a pretty impressive season. And I don't think that Duran, the oblique injury worries me a little bit. I could totally be wrong. And I mean, clearly, I'm sure history will show that I will be. But I think the safer pick to me was to pick the field rather than pick Duran.
Well, let's move forward here. Season MVP, boys. And this will be a big reveal. I'm excited to see it. Interesting.
Oh, my gosh.
Stuff.
This doesn't make any sense for really any of us, actually.
We all hedged.
So, Hoges, let's start with you.
Every single one of us hedged.
I think that yours is the most fun. So let's start with Hoges, I guess.
I'm leaning into Lewis. I'm not going as high as an average as Dan is giving him.
Yeah, by about 40 points, it looks like you have him down from what Dan projected.
I went with Lewis, 260, 370, 550 for his slash. I think he's going to get 34 homers, which I picked him for that, decided I'd make those two match, and 94 RBI. And I know where the first thing you guys are going to say is, how is Buxton not winning the season MVP when he's getting a 980 OPS? I don't have a good answer.
But what you've just predicted is a 930 OPS for another guy.
And I think he's gonna play more games. I think he's gonna be more regular. I am.
He's going
Buxton,
to the bathroom on a
Lewis.
good
I could not be more excited about Buxton, Lewis, and Correa. Like, I know the Twins are leaning into that, and we're getting all these like pictures of the three of them. I am in. I am so in. Hook, line, and sinker.
But okay, so David, didn't you give us the rankings? Like, I'm sorry, it's a 920 OPS. That would still rank in the top 10, wouldn't it?
I'm just outside the top 10, I think.
Okay, all right. So two
and
players,
like top
just,
3
yeah.
MVP year. Like, I think he's going to be phenomenal. I think he's going to be absolutely phenomenal this year, and I think he's going to stay healthy.
So I went with Carlos Correa, 272, 357, 468 as the slash lines. I think he'll hit around 25 home runs. I think that he is going to be a Gold Glove shortstop as we all expected, and I think he's going to stay on the field. I just think that he's a very important piece to this team, and I would argue maybe even the most important piece because of the commitment that the Twins made to him. It's important that he sort of fills those shoes. So where there was just the discussion we had about Pablo Lopez and having a lot of pressure put upon him, I think that Correa feels that same pressure from the position player side of things.
My numbers are actually very similar. I also picked Correa. I didn't do the slash line, but I did the old-fashioned one with 25 home runs, 98 RBI, and an OPS of 840, which is about what you predicted, David. It's maybe just a touch higher, obviously. But it is a hedge. If Buxton hits 38 home runs and has an OPS of 915, it would be hard for him to not be. But I also think there's something to be said for Carlos Correa's defensive play that I think that we certainly appreciate. And I think that factors in a little bit too. And obviously his leadership, I don't know, does that get quantified in an
Clubhouse
MVP
guy.
vote?
It for sure does. It absolutely does. Over a course of a 162 game season, that kind of attitude and that championship culture, I think does matter. I think
culture.
and he is. I think he legitimately is. So yeah, I agree with both of your picks. I think they're solid. I'm on the Lewis train so much right now.
You underestimate my power.
Wow, this is interesting. The season LVP. I can't say that I'm surprised by the people that were picked here. Hoges, it looks like you doubt the honesty, perhaps, of one of the Twins starting pitchers here. And or I don't know, just his talent.
I want to believe that it was just the injury last year, but I don't. There's a lot of nervousness around him, and I just I think that's the, like I said in our prediction, I think it's our weakest spot is that starting rotation, and part of it is because I don't see Joe Ryan. I see Joe Ryan as having the second half he had and not the first half.
Do you think that part of the problem was that he would throw the ball right down the middle of the plate?
Yeah, that doesn't work. It's to what's his name, the Astros guy, right down the center of the plate. Let's see what happens.
Yeah,
Yordan Alvarez. I don't know why I lost that name. I mean, maybe I'm just trying to block him out from all memory of mine right now. But yeah, right down the middle of the plate every time.
That's interesting. I honestly, I don't see that regression. I just think that he's a guy who I thought was going to be in the rotation for a while and be like a really solid producer. It's really hard for me to believe that he had half a season that was as good as it was, and there not to be a trigger for it to fall off like it did. So you just think the guys figured him out, or what was the catalyst if it wasn't injury that allowed him to have such a steep drop off so quickly? It wasn't like it was, he's sort of the numbers started to trail off. It was like, oh my goodness, he fell off a cliff here with these numbers.
No, I think that's a fair question. I think with how he pitches, he's kind of a change of pace pitcher because he's not a flamethrower with crazy stuff. He's more of a how he locates pitches, and he can't throw that hard. I think it is people did figure him out. They realized more that, okay, this guy isn't going to try to blow anything past you. You just have to wait for a fastball, and you're going to be okay because none of his off-speed stuff is incredibly overwhelming. And I think that they got that with him. And once you know that that's coming and you have pitching coaches telling you that's coming, it's less surprising of a change of pace when you're facing a guy who's throwing 96, 97 the day before.
That ERA was his ERA last year. It was 4.51. So if he has a year... I know, but if he has the year like that... I think we are hoping that he takes a step forward, that he's more like the first half of the year for more of the year. Now, his ERA is always just going to be a little bit higher because Rocco leaves him in to take a couple shellackings every year and eat some innings. And so I do think that, honestly, that number is maybe just a little bit higher than it ought to be, even simply because of that. Not a lot, but, it could be 4.3 instead of 4.5. But I guess... it would be a disappointment if his ERA was the same this year as it was last year.
I think that's more of what my prediction is. Like, I think everyone is hoping, and I am too, that he's the number 2 guy. I think he's going to end up being the number 4, number 5 guy when the season is over.
Where do you put Louis Varland out of curiosity?
Number 4, number 5 guy. Oh. I think. Oh, like for ERA though, is that what you're asking?
Well, I'm just wondering if Joe Ryan is going to struggle that much. Would you rather have Louis Varland on the mound in the postseason as a starter? I guess is sort of what I'm asking.
I think that's too soon to say, but I am hopeful, and I think I would predict Varland to have a slightly lower ERA than Joe Ryan. But like if Louis Varland makes it through the entire year with a 4.5 ERA, no one's disappointed. Like maybe we're hoping for a little bit more than that, but we will take that as a 5. Ryan, we want and frankly kind of need as a 2, and I don't see that happening.
David, yours and mine are an interesting pair. How about you go ahead first?
It concerns me a little bit. Like I know these are predictions.
You both can't be right. No, you really both can't be right.
If we're both right, that's a problem. But so I took Alex Kirilloff. I feel for the guy, first of all, right? Like we've all been excited about Alex Kirilloff for a long time. I'm just not convinced that he's going to be able to make the steps that he needs to be an everyday major league player. And I think that really his biggest hurdle to overcome is that he has one arm shorter than the other.
There it was. I was wondering how long it was going to take.
No, but I think he struggles at first base, so he's going to be sort of sent out to the outfield. But the problem is it's going to be harder and harder to find at bats, especially if there's some health to be found in the outfield this season. You have guys who you want to give at bats to. So Kirilloff needs to get starts at first base, but out of the 2 guys who you have who can really play first base, he's the weaker first baseman. So then he has DH at bats. But the problem is you're going to have to give Buxton his fair share of DH at bats when you're giving him off days. So I just don't see him succeeding this season. And honestly, this is sort of the make or break season for him. I kind of put him and Trevor Larnach in sort of the same categories in that they got to prove that they're major league guys now because they're running out of time.
I was kind of surprised that Kirilloff is even being touted as much this year as he has been. I almost kind of thought last year was the make or break year. And it turned out to be just kind of, again, another injury-marred one where, he just, something always kind of breaks on him. And it's not even just the one arm that is shorter than the... We should correct. He had a surgery to make one of the bones in his arm shorter because 2 bones were rubbing against each other. It's like the Kirk Gibson surgery.
That's why we lovingly refer to him as the T-Rex.
Right. And yes, I agree with you. I think we want Alex Kirilloff to have a great year, but it just doesn't seem... I can totally see that. I'm taking the other side. I think Carlos Santana is going to be the one that struggles. I picked him to just have 10 home runs and 40 RBI, which I think would be underwhelming. I do think that the conundrum is who else plays first base. I mean, like, are you going to have Jose Miranda come up and play first base?
I am not throwing away my shot.
If Jose Miranda comes up and is great, then fantastic. But I think we have a lot of questions, actually, around first base. And I just don't know that Santana actually will be the answer at the age that he is. I think it's different than bringing in a guy like Jim Thome at the end of his career because Thome was brought in basically to DH. So maybe this is a flip where they want him to just play good defense, but I don't know. There's just something about it that doesn't strike me as working.
Is this a route for Brooks Lee to come up then? Is it something where like Farmer or Julian could play first and then Brooks Lee gets called up if both of these guys are struggling?
Yeah, I think that's the most likely scenario, honestly, on the season. If things sort of shift around in the infield at all this season, it's going to be exactly that. Brooks Lee is going to bat just ridiculously at AAA. The Twins are going to be forced to bring him up to the major league level, and the way they'll do that is Eddie Julian's going to slate in at first base, and Brooks Lee will play second base. I think that's the most likely scenario.
Do you think that they do that, like, I don't know, like early June? When Brooks Lee has played about 60 games or so in the minors, and then they would say that that's probably a significant enough sample size to
Dan, will
to
you
bring
stop?
him up?
Will you stop? And first of all, that wouldn't be the only sample size. It'd be everything up leading up to that, as far as the other places that he stopped on his minor league journey. So that being said, though, Dan Thompson, that being said, I do think that Brooks Lee is a guy who we're going to see for a long time, and I think the earlier the Twins can get him up here, the better. And I honestly think this decision is going to be made for Rocco anyway. I think that injuries are going to make it clear when Brooks Lee is going to debut, and I think it'll probably be earlier than June.
I think so too, because in all seriousness, I don't think the Twins are going to sit on Brooks Lee. Like I think if he starts hitting AAA, they will get him up. By all accounts, from what we've heard, they are so high on him. And you look at his stats. stats at every single level, I think he's going to have a super, super, super short leash in a good way. Like when he starts, if he's doing well, he's up. Like they won't mess around with that.
The inconsistency of David Kufas here is just, I don't know how you're not laughing him off the stage right now, Hoges. The fact that some sample sizes for some people are big enough and they're not big enough for other people. Never mind that Royce Lewis was a number 1 pick. Never mind that he was raking minor league pitching. That doesn't matter, apparently, but it matters for Brooks Lee. Like, this is...
David loves Brooks Lee.
He does.
He absolutely loves Brooks Lee, and I'm not going to... But here's the thing, Dan. I'm not going to poo on that parade because I love seeing David happy every once in a while. So I like this about him. I want to encourage him to get excited about small sample sizes.
Okay, here's the thing. I don't understand. I know that you're trolling to some extent, but it's very important to me that the listeners understand what I'm saying, and it bothers me so much that you're doing this intentionally. There is a difference in sample size necessitating a call up to the MLB versus projecting success at the MLB level based upon the few number of games played at the MLB level. What you guys are saying is that the sample size at each segment is going to project their MLB stats, which is just ridiculous to say that that Royce Lewis is going to hit 300 grand slams because of the 70 game sample size at the MLB level. I'm saying that the sample size of Brooks Lee in the minors facilitates a call-up, not that it facilitates that he's going to come up and hit 80 home runs. That's not what I'm saying, and it bothers me, again, to no end that you are doing this intentionally.
That sounds the same to me. I mean,
that's not the same! Stop it!
I was just checking. So if Brooks Lee wears the number 72, nobody else has that right now. So I think that would be okay from a jersey inventory standpoint, at least temporarily.
Dan is going to be correctly predicting, like at trade deadline time, Dan's going to have this huge spreadsheet that is just what jersey numbers we can actually trade for.
That's a good idea, actually. I should start on that. Though that would require me to add to the spreadsheet. And I'm not sure that's really anything that I don't add a tab or something like that.
Well, I don't even know if it's allowed. Are we
probably
allowed
locked.
to edit the spreadsheet?
All the cells are locked. You guys don't. It's too much power to allow you guys. And you just erase everything I've written and just put Lewis into every category. It wouldn't even matter.
You guys have already given your crazy predictions, I guess. I'm going to give mine.
What? Neither of us have given our crazy predictions.
That was a joke about the prediction.
I'm so riled up. I can't even tell when you're trolling. Can't even tell.
I don't know. Yours guys are not as crazy, actually, as I...
We're not from Boston. Use guys' predictions are crazy.
I don't know. Like, well, okay, maybe they're a little bit... How about you talk about yours here? Because I sure hope that they're true.
You're arguing that ours are too crazy?
They're not crazy enough.
Not crazy enough.
Do you see yours? Yours is like the most benign vanilla pudding prediction I've ever seen. Yeah.
All right, I'll talk about mine.
I love how we're having this 5-minute conversation about our predictions that only we can see.
Makes for great radio.
I think
it does.
I think the reason David didn't pick mine is because he can't say his name. So I'm going to go with this. And by the way, can we remember that I thought that Eddie Julian was going to have a great year at the crazy prediction last year? That was what I said, and I was right. I think Simeon Woods Richardson makes 15-plus starts for this team with an ERA under 4. And if you don't think that that's a crazy prediction, then I don't quite know why you don't think so.
English teacher, ladies and gentlemen. English teacher.
If
you don't think that, I wonder why you don't think that.
Well, what's not crazy about that prediction?
Because we know that the rotation is a weak point for this Twins team, and so there's a good chance that SWR does make a lot of starts for this team.
You can't remember yourself to say his whole name.
Won't even try. It's not even worth it. And I think that an ERA under 4 isn't crazy. So I guess I just think that this is a logical prediction, not a crazy prediction.
Wow, Hoges, defend me here.
You're not going to get as much from me as you wanted. I think the 15-plus is going to happen because I'm just terrified about this rotation. I will give you a little bit more that an ERA under 4 would be pretty crazy because as how I've kind of set it up, that would be like 3rd on the team for starter ERA. I hope half of that happens, and I hope the other half doesn't, if that makes sense. Like, I hope we don't have to use him that much. I just think that we probably will.
I wanted to say Matt Cantorino, but then he's going to start the year on the injured list at AAA, and I just don't think that's good. If you're counting on, well, if I'm picking a AAA starter who's going to make an impact, that slows him down considerably. So I'm worried about that aspect. I think Cantorino probably has better stuff than Simeon Woods-Richardson, but I think Simeon Woods-Richardson is kind of the anointed guy who, or he's not even anointed, he's just kind of like, he's there to be the AAA starter who comes up and actually fills a gap when somebody gets hurt or is ineffective.
Well, I think David Festa, though, we shouldn't leave his name out of these predictions because there's a good chance that he's going to get an opportunity at the major league level also. Side note here, just for Hoges, Matt Cantorino, this is a special call out. Again, I live in Northeast Minneapolis. I would love to host you for a game night. I have a large collection. I only keep the best. I'm very good at teaching games, and I rarely win them. So I'm a great opponent when it comes to board games.
To try to mend some fences here, David is fantastic at explaining games. So my biggest barrier to entry is if it takes longer than 2 minutes to explain it to me, I want nothing to do with it. So David knows that. So to be fair, if we are ever playing games, he picks children games that he can play with me. and it is, I will give him that. I will lay down my sword on that aspect. So Cantorino, if you're listening, and that part is true.
Well, Hoges, how about you give your crazy prediction here?
I think that Buxton is going to be healthy for an entire season. I think he's going to make it through the entire season. I think he's going to play 140 games plus. I mean, this is the 2020 year, but going from 2018, this is how many games he's played. 28. 87, 39, which that was the shortened year, 61, 92, 85. So if this prediction isn't crazy, I don't know what is. And since Dan was kind of patting himself on the back, I was right on my prediction last year. I said that the Twins would have a starter that finished in the top 3 of the AL Cy Young. Sonny Gray finished second, and I think there was a lot more. I mean, Pablo Lopez, I think, actually was lower than he should have been. And for a while, the Twins had 2 guys that were in the top 5 that everyone was talking about all year long. So I hope I'm right again. If any of these predictions can be right that I have made, I think this is the one I want.
I would love this to be true. I think it's very difficult for my mind to even comprehend that as a possibility, honestly. Like, it's really hard to see that happening. And so I think for that reason, it is a crazy prediction. But just like you said, Hoges, if that is true, I think a lot of things happen that work really well. If Buxton, in the sample sizes we've seen at the major league level, if he is healthy for the full season and we can see sort of what he is as a player, for so long we've heard that if he plays a whole season, he could be an MVP candidate. Let's see that happen. Let's see that come into reality and not just be these projections that we see every single season about dark horse MVP candidates and guys who are going to win Gold Gloves. Let's see it on the field, please.
Well, and we've pounded this point into the ground. He's so fun to watch. So just that in and of itself makes the season more enjoyable.
David, what about you?
Carlos Correa returns to health and finishes in the top 3 in MVP voting. I think that he is going to show himself to be the leader that we know he can be. He's going to come here and he's going to build what he said he'd build.
I want to build a championship culture.
And I think that he's going to perform well at the plate. I think that as fun as it is to joke about sample sizes, I loved the quote from Jose Altuve, which this is the only thing I love about Jose Altuve, was that when he was talking about Correa at the plate in the postseason when the Twins were playing the Astros, that he just knew that Correa was going to do something special at the plate because that's what Correa does. And I do think that is accurate, and I think that Correa has proven to be able to do that without trash cans. Thank you very much. And I do think that this is the season that we're going to see why the Twins paid him the money that they did.
I mean, so have the other Astros, to be fair, too. They've played pretty well without the trash cans, too.
I'm not convinced they stopped using them, Dan.
Maybe they just switched to something else. If Carlos Correa does
bins.
this, more eco-friendly. I do think that if Carlos Correa has the kind of season that our stats predict that he would have, he'd certainly be a candidate there. It's hard. This is the same criticism that I would have had for Hoges last year. It's just really hard to predict who's going to be an MVP because 162 games is a long time, and you never quite know who can sustain it over the entirety of that. But that would really bode well if Correa can finally do that.
Yeah, I like this one, David, a lot. Honestly, this was my backup, what I was going to pick if I didn't do the Buxton one. I think it is crazy enough to predict someone finishing in the top 3, but but there's that taste that's there because he's healthy again, and we know what he can do when he is healthy, and he showed us a little bit of it right at the end of last year. And I think, the other thing, too, that we haven't talked about, he had to go through that ridiculous offseason last year where he was on 4 different teams at one point in time, constantly seeing doctors. He's got a young family, too, so the stress of that, I know these guys make more money than is humanly possible, but still, that is still stressful for your family when you have a family with young children, and he didn't have to go through any of that this year. He got to do his normal offseason training plan with the same team, with the same trainers for the first time in 2 years. So I think this is going to be huge, and I think that while it is crazy, I think it is reasonable, and I like it.
And the year before the Twins got him, he was 5th in MVP voting, won a Gold Glove, and was an All-Star. And I think that that's a level that he can get back to. There's not a big difference between being top 3 and top 5, honestly. I think it's entirely reasonable, and for the reasons it makes a lot of sense, Hoges.
Well, boys, it's time. How is this Twins season gonna finish? Are we gonna be happy? Are we gonna be sad? Are we being optimistic with our predictions, or are we being pessimistic, or are we being realistic? Well, we're never realistic, really, on this show, but it is time for our season predictions. I think we'll go. Hoges is.
Well, Dan and I are the same.
That is remarkable.
This I love this so much. I hadn't looked. I wanted to cheat so bad. I want David to go first, actually.
Yeah.
Because this entire prediction, David has been yelling at Dan and I for drinking the Kool-Aid, being way too positive, going for small sample sizes. And I wanted this to be true so bad. I hoped it was. David, please give us your prediction.
So I think they're going to finish the season 93-69. And I think they're going to lose in the World Series to the Braves or the Dodgers, or really any of the very good teams who play in the NL compared to the AL this season.
The entire NL West, basically,
pretty
now
much.
with all the guys that have gone out there.
Except for the Padres.
Yeah.
Except for the Padres.
Except for the Dads.
Don't forget about that.
But yeah, I do think that the Twins are going to perform well. I think they're going to continue their postseason success that they had last season by getting further in, obviously, as far as you can get without winning. I think they get to the World Series, and then our dreams are crushed. Dan and I will be crying at Target Field as the Twins lose in 7 games. It's going to be so
Where
sad.
am I going to be?
I don't know. You never seem to want to go to games with me. You want to sit elsewhere whenever we go. You're going to be crying by yourself, folks. Sorry. That's what
Oh, no.
I feel like the phrase, as far as you can go without winning, is like a Minnesota Twins fan's, no, just a Minnesota sports fan's description, right?
Is.
Like, that's what that is.
I want to be overwhelmingly positive, but I'm not allowed to get all the way up there. I still have to bite it. But
I do think it out of all the possible records and postseason finishes, it's pretty impressive that you two literally synced up exactly.
We did 90-72, losing in the ALCS. It seems it's a little bit higher than all the stat predictions would be, but I think this division isn't great. So I think you're going to get a few extra wins out of that there. I just think it's the next logical step here, but there's a lot of good teams in the AL too, right? And so, I know you're down on the Orioles, but the Orioles are there. The Rangers, should still be decently back. I do think the AL is more open than the NL is, but I don't know. It felt the right level of optimism.
yeah, I agree with everything you said. Obviously, I picked the exact same record and losing in the ALCS. I think that the AL East is so good, and I just don't think the Twins' starting rotation depth is good enough to win a 7-game series. I think that's what kind of got me a little bit. But I love so much that Dan and I picked a lower record and season finish than David did.
I truly believe my record is more accurate than yours. Like that's not like I just think that they're going to win a lot of baseball games this season, and I think that again the strength of schedule has to be taken into account here.
I agree with you if everyone is going to be healthy. I just think that starting rotation is going to deal with a few more things, and we're going to lose some games that we shouldn't.
Yeah, I would agree that I have more questions about the pitching staff, and it's not so much the relievers, right, but those starters than I do about the lineup. I just think there's the issue that I would have with the lineup is if they don't have the depth, potentially. I mean, Brooks Lee, we've talked about this, is kind of he's really the guy that we're counting on then. I think Wally Jenkins is still a year or two away. It's not Wally. Is it? It's not Walker either. Is it? What is it?
No, yes, it is Walker.
It is
And
Walker.
I so hope, Dan, if for some reason you get to meet him, you call him Wally, just because I want to see the look on his face. Like, who are you talking to, dude?
Oh, man.
I just think of Wally the beer man every time Dan calls him Wally Jenkins.
Okay, we will now move on, folks. Again, for who are regular listeners, you know this is a typical segment where we do Puckett's picks. We predict who we think is going to do best in the first season series against the Royals. I'm very excited. I'm sure you boys are as well.
And we'll see you tomorrow night.
Puckett's Picks.
So the listeners always get to pick the player first, and shockingly, we crowdsourced this on Twitter. You know, Royce Lewis took the listeners' pick, which is basically the only reason they won last season is they took Royce Lewis every single opportunity that he was available.
Too small of a sample size.
And what's different this year is because Hoges is on so much, and so that means that he picks kind of an episode before so that he can defend his choice when he's on, and then he makes the next choice. And so we just thought it made more sense for him to have his own pick. So now we're going to have 4 picks, which I think is kind of cool that we're always going to have just a few more players up there. And so because David lost last year, let's remember that, then David gets to pick. And he lost by a lot, Hoges, didn't he?
He did. He was in single digits until about September, I think, last year.
I think he barely cleared 100. Now, notably, I cannot find previous seasons on the spreadsheet
it
here.
seems to be gone from it.
I do love
out.
that neither of you can figure out how to unhide cells. There's a reason why you two aren't allowed to touch the spreadsheet. But that being said, I'm going to go with my MVP pick. I'm going with Carlos Correa, obviously, the proper choice. I do think, though, we have seen Correa not always succeed right out of the gate. Like, he needs some time to ramp up. I don't know.
Or whenever you pick him.
Well,
like it seems.
To be fair, I'm trying to break that trend early this season here. I picked Correa about 1,000 times last season, and he failed me about 1,000 times last season. So I'm going to take Correa, and then we'll go to Dan, and then Hoges.
So I will go with Byron Buxton. I mean, I don't know who else I would pick here. I think that's the trio, right? That's the Twins' advertised trio. And so it only makes sense to have him be the third guy here.
To your point, though, Dan, having this 4th pick is pretty interesting because if these top 3 guys are healthy, unless somebody else gets hot, there's a real good chance that these are going to be the top 3 off the board nearly every episode.
Oh, for sure. And this makes it really tough on me. And
Yeah.
I am very excited that I do get to pick every series this year. The one thing I guess I'm like kind of excited about and not excited about, David is going to be so mad at me for not answering right when he wants me to about what my pick is. And it's going to be a thorn in both of our sides the entire year. We did a pick the stick thing back when we were in high school, and man. I was always the one where the pick got hung up on the whole time. So I guess we're going back to our roots again this year. But, man, this one's tough. I think I'm going to go Eddie Julian. I think he's going to get on base a lot. I think he's going to pick up some points there. The one thing I'm nervous about is he's probably not going to play in every single game in this series, but I think he'll maybe get a pinch hit opportunity here or there too. So I'm going with Eddie.
I really wanted to do a crazy prediction around Ryan Jeffers because I think that he is going to have a phenomenal year, but I couldn't. I ran my picks with a couple of different people, like my crazy predictions, to see what people were thinking, which one seems reasonable, which one seems unreasonable, and I just couldn't come up with exactly how to word it that my Ryan Jeffers crazy prediction would be. I just think he's going to be really, really good this season, and that's not a very good prediction. I think he's going to be good at baseball. Okay, David, thank you for that insight.
Well, I thought that too. Because one of my crazy predictions that I thought about with him was that he's going to be an all-star, which it's just hard to be an all-star as a catcher because the Twins just don't let them play that often. Not that anyone really does in Major League this year, but I wouldn't be that shocked if that happened.
Well, guys, that's the show. We've gone through all of our segments. The next episode will be a real one with the segments and things like that. I still cannot believe that baseball is really this close. And yet here we are just a couple days away.
Very exciting. Well, Hoges, thanks so much for joining us. You'll hear Hoges quite a bit more this season. In general, just Dan and I have ever-growing commitments, it seems, throughout the season. So Hoges will get a few more opportunities to be on the show. We really appreciate the time. I'll go ahead and send us out, boys. Well, folks, if you like what you hear, please tell a friend. You can follow us on X at Min for the Win and find our Min for the Win Facebook page and Instagram pages. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast platform so that you're notified when new episodes are available. And if you could leave us a rating or a like, we'd greatly appreciate it. If you'd like to support the show further and get some added benefits as a listener, you can find us on Patreon. That link is in the description. Thanks so much for listening, and as always, go Twins.
That'll wrap up another episode of Men for the Win, a podcast hosted by David Kuvas and Dan Thompson, two avid fans who appreciate well-played baseball, especially when it's done by the Twins. Thanks so much for listening, and as always, go Twins.